Hello, Matt Jasa here. Welcome back to another episode. Here's my glass candle with an all-glass wick. Definitely one of my most favorite things. You can use a traditional sparker to light your torch. It is a little bit more difficult. A small flame makes it easier to light, but you have to be careful not to accidentally melt the fuel canister. So that's why a big lighter is not the best idea. So I went in on this flame cut here with a 1-inch tubing and 4mm wall thickness. So that would be 26 by 4 millimeters. If you are planning to blow out bigger vessels or bubbles, it is a good idea to go with a larger tube, especially one that's heavy walled. Those thick walls on the tube are what expands out to form the vessel. And so if you use a very thin tube like a 1mm, it'll just pop very quickly. And so I went in with a little bubble rip here to get this open to attach a blow tube. I'll flare it open a little bit to connect up to the 1-inch tubing. And I'll make sure to heat up both sides very hot and molten and connect them in the flame. I also want to keep rotating and hold it very level, very straight. That way it forms up a nice straight connection. So my tube is a little bit too long. I'll go ahead and attach another blow tube to the opposite end and flame cut it again in the middle. And so as you're heating up the tube, you might notice some condensation, some water droplets forming on the inside. It's not really a big deal. They'll just kind of evaporate very quickly. And that comes from the humidity in the air, the air trapped in the tubes. They actually dry out pretty well in the heat. But I'll go ahead and turn up this heat here and start melting this tube back. I'm going to start condensing the walls and try to thicken it up about twice as thick as it is. And so if you had a larger torch, you probably could heat up the whole tube and start blowing it out without having to condense it back. It would be a little bit of a longer bubble, a little bit like a cylinder bubble, but with that large torch you could start shaping it up pretty quickly. I'm running this 2-stage torch off of two 10-liter per minute oxygen concentrators. And now if I would hook those concentrators up to an electric pump and then to a large holding tank, I could make a home fill system. And with that, I could easily reach the higher pressures required for something like a 3-stage torch. But for running straight off the concentrators, this one works pretty well. It's a little bit of a softer flame. It kind of wraps around the glass a bit. So I do think it is good for bathing the glass in like a nice even heat. But I'll admit the kind of pinpoint flame is a little bit lacking. Things like popping holes is a little bit hard to get that heat directed in one specific area. But really, I think a lot of the lower pressure torches probably have that issue. I know the GTT brand, their triple mix variety, is said to have a good pinpoint flame. And it looks like it in some of the videos I've seen, but I've never tried one myself. I definitely want to try one someday here. Mainly, I don't want to hold any bias to any brands. I think their products should speak for themselves. But now that I have another blow tube attached, I'm going to go ahead and remove the one on the opposite side and melt the rest of the tubing into this large gather. And so as I'm working here, my GoPro starts beeping at me, and I realize I forgot to delete the files from the last video. Before I can go fix this problem, I have to let this large gather cool down first before I put it in the kiln. I'll turn off the lights so you can see it glowing in the dark. I have some blue exotic from North Star. It's packed with a lot of metals, especially silver, so it should strike up in the flame and in the kiln and change a lot of colors. And now they recommend to apply it with a very oxidizing flame. That means extra oxygen, less propane. And when you're done working it, before you kiln your piece, hit it with a heavy reducing flame for a moment, and that'll give you a blast of metallic colors. And now with the oxygen concentrators, I feel it's a little bit harder to get a very good oxidizing flame. I usually end up over reducing the striking colors a little bit before I'm done working. You know, sometimes you just gotta do the best you can with what you got and keep improving on what you got so you can do even better. I know I've been getting a lot of comments lately. You know, glad to see I'm back here melting, but when's my next video? And so I hear what you're saying. You know, you want more consistent uploads here. So welcome to Melty Monday. I'm going to do my best here to dedicate Mondays to a glassblowing episode. Now they might not all be as long and detailed as one like this one, and I'll vary them up, but there might be some similarities. Like this one is a little bit like the Glassblowing 2020 episode. But if you did enjoy that one, then you'll probably like this one too. I'm heating up the lines a little bit before I start swiping, and then I follow the rod behind the flame as I'm swiping down. And you can do this with a tool, a tungsten pick, but I like using the clear rod, especially here over the striking colors. It'll cause those lines to strike a little bit differently since it has a layer of clear over it, and it'll give you a bit of an extra accent or another layer of color. And so with the right use, the right heat, you can definitely get almost a whole rainbow of color just out of that one rod, mainly out of the silver. This is my face mask. I throw this on for extra large projects, usually anything on the 2-stage side. And so I'm going to take it out of the flame and just rotate it for a moment in the air so the heat can radiate and even out. And then start blowing into it to make a sphere. I'm going to go ahead and heat it up again and start to contract it back down and blow it out again. This will help even out the wall thickness. I applied some pretty thick lines to the outside, so I'm trying to get the outside flat so it's not very bumpy. You can leave the lines a little bit less melted in and give it a little bit of texture, but you have to be careful with stress. You want to anneal the piece if you're trying to do that. And so I pulled out a little bit of glass, that way I can pop a hole and attach a blow tube to the top. This way I can finish melting the rest of the color near that blow tube and blow the rest of it out. I know it might seem a little bit complicated with the detaching and reattaching of blow tubes at first, but once you get into it, you really don't even think about it. It's just a simple 1-2 process. And my blow tube was a lot larger than the hole, so I went ahead and just put some extra heat into it and pulled it out to make it a little bit thinner. I'll go ahead and melt that blow tube off real quick, and then I'll heat up the other end and blow it out. And so this is kind of a cool shot of the inside here. You have the light kind of radiating through and the color kind of creating little windows there. You can see that inside bubble there is the inside cavity of the glass, the hollow section. It really is a pretty neat little light show that the glass blowers get to observe when they're making their pieces. And if you notice the colors, they all turn reddish orange as they heat up, but they maintain different shades of red and orange. And this is one of those times I wish I had a larger torch. It's hard to maintain a good heat over a wide area, especially with boro like this. And now you might notice in my videos, I turn my propane down quite a bit when I'm not using it. And to be honest, this has saved me a lot of fuel. I know starting out, you'll go through a lot of extra glass and resources practicing. I remember I used to exchange my propane tanks quite a bit. I use the same tanks that you'd use for a barbecue grill, so I can exchange it at the hardware store or the grocery store. But so then I would start turning it down and just saved a lot of extra propane. And now they do make foot pedals that can turn the fuel on and off with a solenoid valve instead of having to use the knobs. So that should make it a little bit more quicker and help you not wonkify your pieces. Now I want to open up the top, so I'm going to blow out a very thin bubble and go in for a quick bubble rip. And you might end up with a lot of thin glass, like right here. It's good not to break that off, just melt it all back. And I'll even out the lip before I spin it out. So I'll use both hands here and begin to spin it very quickly. Using Centrifugal Force, it'll pull out the wall into a nice lip. Of course, Centrifugal Force isn't actually a force as we describe them. The best way I can explain it is it's more like straight momentum. And now I know this might sound a little bit odd, but when you spin an object, you don't actually spin the molecules, but you cause them to fly in a straight direction. It's really the binding force between the molecules holding the object together that curves its path. If you spin the object fast enough, the momentum will overcome that binding force and it'll explode in all directions. But to keep this object from exploding, I should heat the blow tube a little bit further down. It breaks off on me right there. Those hot sealed connections weren't annealed properly in the kiln, so they retain a bit of stress. It's always good to work a couple inches away from the connection point, or else it might break and lead to further cracks. And so my shaping wasn't the best there. You can see it's a little bit lopsided. But I'm just going to go ahead and flatten the bottom and throw it in the kiln and see what kind of colors we get. Alright, and so you can see the vessel isn't the straightest here unfortunately, but I did get a lot of color popping out. It's interesting that the inside lines are green. They didn't strike like the outside because they weren't exposed to the atmosphere like the outside is. And so I hope you enjoyed this video on Melty Monday. If this video does get enough shares and likes, there might even be a Fire Friday. But until next time, as always, stay melty.